Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Pamela Donnelly, and I am here to bring a video about test optional and what is actually happening in the admissions offices across our country. If you like this video, please be sure to subscribe at College Admissions Simplified on YouTube, where I'm going to be sharing even more data like this so that you know how to make the right informed decisions for your student. First of all, I have to begin by saying I care very deeply about fairness in testing. And I am on the record that both the SAT and the ACT are problematic. I literally have an entire portion of my dissertation written on this. If you have an interest in that, you can look it up on ProQuest and you will see I've made a very strong stand about concerns for the biases in these exams. With that said, I am a consultant, and my job is to make sure your student has every competitive advantage in these times where things have gotten very confusing. So when people say test optional, I want to first of all point out that test optional is not the same thing as test blind. In the state of California, for example, it was very exciting for a lot of folks when the UC system and the Cal State system went test blind. What does that mean? It means even if a student tried to submit a score, they were not going to look at it. They were saying, we don't care about scores. We're going to look at your GPA. We're going to look at, numerous other things, recommendations. In some cases, there are schools that care about student ranking. They care about teacher recommendations, counselor recommendations. There are many moving parts in the admissions offices. And I'm going to give you a phrase that I need you to keep in mind as you're trying to be informed. Remember that there are IPs. These are institutional priorities. You guys, every school does not have the same priority. And it's important to remember that because these are businesses, these admissions offices can make determinations based on what they think that they need for their school. A lot of times this involves determinations, setting aside slots for kids who are not just in athletic programs. And as we know, there's a big business around recruitment and NCAA and all of these sort of athletic considerations. But, I've heard stories of students who have gotten into schools because they played French horn or some unusual instrument where there was a need for that. The student was close enough within the 25th to 75th percentile for their GPA and any other criteria, and they were admitted to that school, possibly over someone who might have had better, I don't know, like could have been GPA or something in one of those categories, right? So institutional priorities are a thing. And as parents and as educators and even as students, it's helpful to have information about what is happening when it's not test blind, right? But it is test optional. Well, here's the big takeaway that I need you to understand. Unfortunately, the truth is, as much as we would all love to put aside these exams, the pressure, the cost of prep, all of the moving parts with that. Sure, every teenager in America is already so overwhelmed by 11th grade. The last thing they need on top of final exams and proms and driving and all these, coming of age moments is to throw, these 4-hour exams on top. But that is in fact something that is connected not only to admissions decisions, but also to the financial aid. So merit-based financial aid is still very commonly tethered, even in test optional schools, to students who submit high exam scores. So let's take a look. I've got something I'm going to screen share right now, just so you can see some data that will be helpful for you. So admit rates with and without test, and you can see these are depending on the school, some pretty big differentiation. So admit rate when there was no exam score given, you can see in the gold. And, for example, let's take a look at University of Georgia. So University of Georgia, they took in just over 30% of students who were admitted without a test. But look at what happened when students submitted a test. All of a sudden, the thumb is on the scale and we have an advantage to test submitters of 1.4. So you can see the differential between these. Colgate, it's, a huge differential, as is Emory. And again, these are selective schools. I think it's important to say every student does not belong at a selective or highly selective institution. But if your student is looking to aim for sort of these, top tier type schools that have low admit rates, you want to have them able to submit a score. And I'll go ahead and stop screen sharing at this time, but you can grab a screenshot of that if it's interesting. Shout out to Compass Education Group who created that information. So in these times of testing, it's another thing that I get asked a lot is, when is the right time to test? So one way to differentiate an application is if your student has already completed Algebra 2, trigonometry, they are ready to take the exam as long as you feel that they have a strong enough background in their English skills, right? So English reading, so the critical reading, understanding grammar, being able to think through, the paragraphs and all of the different pieces of that, right? So within the paragraph, what is the sequencing? What is the author's primary point that they're making? What is the vocabulary in context? As long as they are at a certain threshold of math, which is Algebra 2 trig, completed, and also strong enough in English that they are ready to take a swing at it. I've seen students take their first attempt as early as 9th grade. I don't recommend it. I'm not like, hey, let's all go do that. No, because more commonly it is 11th grade. But many of the clients whose parents hire me to be the mentor for their student, their students are usually 1 year ahead and sometimes 2 years ahead. So if they're taking, let's say, an ACT, and I give them what we end up doing with my team is we have created a diagnostic that helps us assess which exam they might do better on. SAT and ACT are very different. ACT has a science section. There's a lot of moving parts with those as well. That seems to be my phrase of the day, moving parts. There's lots of those in all of this. In any event, you want your student to get that solid score as early as possible if they're ready to take it. There is a disadvantage to waiting. First of all, they're just like everybody else doing it in the end of 11th grade, but also, they're probably going to have forgotten things that are a big chunk of these tests. Geometry, linear equations, some of that early algebra, even things like ratios and percentages, they won't have seen that for several years if you wait until 11th grade to have them take the exam, or have them not take it at all, which, as I've said, is an option. And we love this idea of test optional. But unless you are ready to pay full ticket for the schools, and that means cost of attendance with tuition and room and board and books and fees, if you would like to get a little break on that, and even some of the high net worth families I help, they don't want to overpay. If their student qualifies for 30 or 60 or 100K off of the, basically the sticker price, they would like to have that. And I would imagine that you do too. So want you to be aware of the way things are working these days. There is a lot of misinformation out there. I'm happy to be a reliable source for you. So the YouTube channel is a great place to find me. I also have a Facebook group called College Admission Simplified that you're welcome to join. And I'll just continue putting out information like this and doing what I can to help. Okay, until next time, it's Pamela. See ya.